Hey, Bhumi.
So Aritha, we're good to go. It's 3 o'clock. So if you'd like to start the discussion, we can start. We have about 70 participants who are with us, which is wonderful. So you can go ahead.
Wonderful. Great. Let's start. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to my panelists and welcome to all our participants for this webinar on Zoom on being transgender in South Asia. Now, we're doing this through iProbono's Equality Law Program. Our Equality Law Program is a global program mainly focusing on issues affecting the LGBT community. We've been doing some fantastic groundbreaking work on advancing the rights of LGBT individuals across the world. And this series and this particular webinar is to share stories which particularly impact and which are from the transgender community in South Asia, often a community which has been invisible, especially in the discourse around LGBT rights globally, and sometimes quite controversial. So it's very important that these stories are shared. And for this particular webinar, we're really excited to have some fantastic panelists who've been so monumental in the transformations that have happened in South Asia on transgender rights. We have Aisha Mughal here. Aisha, thank you so much for joining us. Aisha is a UNDP expert consultant to the Ministry of Human Rights, the government of Pakistan. She was the first transgender woman lecturer, first transgender woman lecturer and the first trans person to represent Pakistan as part of a national delegation. Aisha, thank you very much for joining and being part of this webinar. We've also got Shaman Gupta. Shaman is the co-chair of the Tweet Foundation, and he has been working for trans rights in India for more than 3 years now. He's been working on a variety of areas affecting transgender persons, especially from a legal perspective, health and employment matters. Thank you so much, Shaman, for joining us from Bangalore. And then finally, we have the fabulous Bhumi Harendran. Bhumi is the founder and executive director of the National Transgender Network in Sri Lanka, and she has been, pivotal in the transformations which have happened here in Sri Lanka, especially around trans matters. And Bhumi is not just an activist; she's also a very talented dancer and performer, and an award-winning actress. She's the first Sri Lankan first trans person here in Sri Lanka to have won a National Film Award for her roles in mainstream movies. So Bhumi, Aisha, Shaman, we're really excited and grateful that you accepted our invitation. And we really want the audience here and the participants to this webinar to hear your stories, trans stories, which have been so invisible, especially in our communities. And we hope that this conversation can help change mindsets, but also make people more aware of the issues which trans communities face in our region. I'm going to start our conversation with Aisha. Aisha, I mean, your profile is it's really profound. There is this perception. There's this perception not only in South Asia, but across the world that Islamic societies are inherently transphobic, and that it is difficult for trans persons to actually be recognized and to achieve a certain status in society. This is not unique to Islamic societies. This is not unique to South Asia. This is definitely not unique to the Asian region. Trans persons have been victims of discrimination and continue to be victims of discrimination across the world. But there's always been this unfair perception and stigmatization of Islamic societies. And you have really shown, you've challenged that perception. And you have shown that, there are certain falsities about this perception. So can you share with us your story, your recognition of your identity, and how you came to be working in the Pakistani government and to represent Pakistan, your government in international fora as a trans woman?
Well, Aritha, thank you so much for the lovely introduction. and for having me today. Uh, well, I feel really happy and privileged to represent my country, Pakistan, because as you said, that most of the people in the world do have this perception that Muslim societies are conservative. But I think, since the inception of Pakistan, the transgender community was always there. We all know that the Hijra culture and the Khwaja culture that we have in South Asia, which is present in Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, has always helped us in sensitizing people because we have always been very visible. And in 2018, when this transgender law was passed in Pakistan, we had it was an almost 2 year process. We had several discussions and debates with all the government departments, with the religious institutions, with the Council of the Islamic Ideology, and everyone was very supportive because transgender culture and the Khwadasara culture have a very rich history. So by using our own history, because see, we all know that our land where Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh is, um, it always celebrated the diversity in terms of gender and sexuality. So it was the British Raj when the British invaded our country, our land, and they brought the Criminal Tribes Act, and then the marginalization of the transgender community happened. But when we read our own history, we understand that our land always celebrated and accepted the gender variance, and transgender people had prominent positions in the Mughal court. So by bringing this history to the table while having this discussion with the policymakers, we were able to sensitize them and educate them that, look, this is not a westernized agenda, this is not an American agenda. This is what this is us, and this is our history, and our land always celebrated and accepted the transgender identity. So that was how we were able to get the law passed. And if you have read the law, you will see that this Transgender Act of Pakistan is one of the progressive laws in the world because it gives the right of self-identification. That ensures the dignity and the basic human right of the transgender citizens of Pakistan. So yes, so I'm happy that Pakistan has become an example for the Muslim world, and as well as for the other parts of the world as well, because we see that even in the developed countries, even today, transgender people have to go through long procedures before getting their identification. But now in Pakistan, we can easily get identification on the basis of self-perceived gender identity. So I think um, people think that I mean, it is very surprising that a country like Pakistan, because normally people of the world assume that Pakistan is very conservative. But let me tell you that in Pakistan, the transgender people have um, acceptance. Still we have a long way to go when it comes to family acceptance. But generally now we see that transgender people are coming out, they are working on different organizations, and people of Pakistan are accepting, because it has, as I mentioned, it has a rich history, because people have always seen transgender community. They used to be part of their weddings, they used to be part of the society. They were marginalized, they were on not on the powerful positions, but trans community was always visible in Pakistan. Whereas when we look at other Muslim countries, such as the countries in the Middle East, we do not see the visible transgender community. So I think so when we compare Pakistan to other Arab countries, we see a lot of difference. So I think from by this comparison, Pakistan is progressing. We have made we have made the legal developments. We are working on the policies. Like right now, my position with the Ministry of Human Rights, my task is to ensure the effective implementation of the act, and we are working on its policy, which we'll be discussing later on in this webinar. So yes, that's it.
Thank you, Aisha. I mean, you brought an interesting comparison with the Middle East and how trans persons aren't given the same recognition, legal status as you have in Pakistan. But we do have Iran, which is part of the wider Middle East,
Yeah.
which was one of the first countries in the world to actually religiously and by government recognize
Yes.
transgender identity, and with the government to this date actually financially supports gender affirmation surgeries. So it looks like there is you have there's a diversity of approaches within the wider Islamic world on how transgender identity is seen, and there's this perception that all Islamic countries or Islam as a religion is dogmatically opposed to transgender persons.
Mm.
Would you say that that is a wrong thinking?
Um, See, as you have mentioned the case of Iran, and yes, Iran has, was the first country, the first Muslim country back in 1970s when the Imam Khomeini gave this fatwa where the trans women were allowed to change their sex and according to their gender identity. I have read that fatwa, and that is a wonderful fatwa. And but yeah, the issue is that, see how that fatwa was issued in Iran. There was this activist, Mariam Khatun Mulkara, who has passed away now. She went to the Imam Khomeini and explained her the entire situation. She explained how she feels as a trans woman, and she was able to, convince, and she also motivated them to have this discussion with the religious scholars, and then they came up with this fatwa. So I think that is the need of the time, that we need to have the discussion with the religious authorities in every country, and come up with a solution, because we hardly see the religious scholars of every religion. They do not talk much about the gender and sexual minorities. So I think more research and more dialogue is needed. And see, that is what I mentioned when we were working on the transgender law in Pakistan. We had detailed discussion with the research team of the Council of Islamic Ideology. So Council of Islamic Ideology in Pakistan is the religious body which gives suggestions to the parliament. So before this law was passed, it went to the Council of Islamic Ideology. We had discussions with them. We came up with our own researches. We shared with them what the Islamic references are, what is in the Quran, what is in the Hadith. So with this discussion, we were able to get the approval from the Council of Islamic Ideology. And I would also like to mention that after that discussion, the chairman of the Council of Islamic Ideology, Dr. Qibla Ayaz, he said on record that the topic of transgender community should be researched upon, it should be discussed. It should be discussed in every mosque, in every masjid, so that people should be sensitized about the rights of the transgender community. So and this is what we need. We need to reach out to the religious scholars, and we need to have this healthy discussion with them.
Great, thank you, Aisha. I'm going to move to Shaman, who's also had, Shaman, you've been an activist for the last 3 years, so probably a bit more recent to the activism of people like Aisha or Bhumi, who came in some ways pioneers of the trans movement in South Asia. What has your experience been through the work you've done in India, particularly in Bangalore? But also maybe something more personal. What was your journey in acceptance of your gender identity? How were you perceived as? What were your struggles? And how did that influence your decision to be an activist and run Tweet Foundation?
Yeah, thank you, Aritha. So I'd like to start with the journey part itself, so that the context is built in how then I reached this point of where I felt that there was a lot of things that needed to be done. Um, So I was born and brought up in Dehradun, a small city in India, where I realized at a very early age that I identified as male, right, at the age of like 6, 7 years old. And from there onwards, I decided that I knew, like at least for myself, that how I felt, but didn't have a vocabulary to explain it to other people. Right? I started treating myself as a guy, started dressing as a boy, started referring to myself as a boy, but I couldn't convince other people to do the same for me because I didn't have any vocabulary of how to explain it to other people. Right? So time went by. I went to like graduated from a school, went to college. Even in college, like I had to stay in a girls' hostel. Graduated from, and in fact, in college was the time then that time we got like access to internet for the first time, right? Because trans men or the gender dysphoria, what you feel with your inner self, right, when you don't relate to the gender that you're born in, is was never discussed about, right, or was never evident. We were, of course, aware about a Hijra community that is there, but to identify as male when you're a female born, no, none such vocabulary existed, none such communities were there that we were aware of. Right? So it was the first time that when I got access to the internet in college around 2009, 2010, was the time I started searching a bit on internet, right? What is this that I'm going through? Because a lot of questions were there, but very less answers. And through a few more years, right? Because like if for anybody as a trans person, the moment you see something, it doesn't hit you that yes, this is what completely I relate to. It takes time to internalize a lot of things that okay, I feel like this, but do I completely relate to the part of transitioning or consider myself as a trans person or a trans man? So like from 2008 to 2011-12 is when I kept on seeing a lot of videos from US, right, where there were a lot of trans men transitioning, and that kept on building the confidence that yes, this is something that a lot of people go through. There are female to male trans persons who are there out there in the world, and also probably in India. I didn't come in contact with anybody from India at that time. And I went ahead with my life and started working. And the turning point was actually 2014 when the Supreme Court of India had released this judgment called Nalsa Jari. And for those of you who are not very well aware of what it is, it was basically Supreme. There was a case that was fought with the government. The Supreme Court had given the judgment that any person in India uh, has the right to self-identify their gender, not only as a third gender or a transgender person, but a female can identify as a male, and a male can identify, male born can identify as a female person, irrespective of whether they have gone through the surgeries or not. And I remember the statement being, from the Supreme Court, that gender identity is very innate to oneself and cannot be determined by any other questionnaire or psychologist or a medical procedure. It is what the person feels about themselves and identify. And when I read that article for the first time, I hadn't actually been into the system of like activism. That was the first time I realized, okay, that there are people who are fighting for this. And for me, then suddenly the vocabulary also expanded, right? I knew that there were a lot of things going on in US, but I wasn't aware till then that what is this fight against the government for their rights or for gender identity rights going on in India. And that just gave me the confidence that okay, this is something valid what I'm feeling, and I need to explore this more. It took another 1 or 2 years for me to also internalize that yes, I want to go ahead with my medical transition or social transition, uh, and to just get in touch with some people, right? I was probably like just busy with my own work and didn't feel the need to get in touch with other trans men in the country. But say around like 4 years back in 2016 is when I started exploring that. Now I like the discomfort within my own body and how I was living was growing a lot, and I wanted to transition. What I also realized was there was no information at all anywhere on websites or anywhere else where I could go and find out, okay, what are the steps that I need to follow to actually be able to identify myself or legally change my document or medically transition, right? I got in touch, luckily, through some Facebook pages, through some other trans men. And in India at that time, there was a group of around 40-50 trans men on a WhatsApp group who would help each other out in terms of, okay, these are the doctors you can go to and these are the legal processes that are there in India right now. And when I got that support, right, I really felt the need to actually make it a little more than a WhatsApp group, a little more systematic way, because I felt that if I hadn't come in contact with that person, or say if that person who helped me out in getting all this information wouldn't have been so open to discuss a lot of these things, what would anybody else throughout the country would have to go through to actually find out these doctors and people or the systems in different cities. So that is where my journey started, where I started collaborating with a lot of trans men across India, started building channels of how people could reach out to us through YouTube or through Facebook or through other blogs online. And then when they reach out to us, what is the method that we can provide them with the correct information, right, regarding the legal aspects and the medical aspects primarily, because those are the first two things that anybody wants to know about. So just like collecting a lot of information from whoever I knew and whoever were in different cities. Okay, what is the procedure in Delhi city or Mumbai city? Who are the doctors there? And especially because there was no law in terms of how these legal processes look like. There was no medical guidance in terms of how the doctors need to take these processes. They would, typically do whatever they have heard or adopt some WPATH guidelines or some international guidelines if they were good, or if they were not that aware, then they would just proceed as they would want to. And similarly, from the legal aspects of changing your documents or you know getting unemployment or a job, people had no clue where to go and how to just go ahead. And especially, and so when I started working a lot with trans men, I also realized that the trans women movement was a little more mature by now, right? They had communities, they had NGOs. Because of HIV intervention, they had also reached to a lot of tier 2, tier 3 cities, rural areas, where they knew, okay, there's a community that is there and was somehow in touch with them. But for us trans men, apart from, because there was the online system itself that was there as a connect, so we were absolutely nowhere connected to anybody who was, say, somewhere in the middle of a village. So that became kind of like important for us to actually create a channel, create a helpline, and that is when, in fact, I myself never wanted to start a proper movement or a kind of a NGO that I'm working with. It was from the support of the trans women activists that I'm working with, that I realized, okay, what are the steps needed to even build communities, right? You can't start interventions without building communities, or and a lot of guidance from how they had grown in their path was what was guiding me to what next steps are needed. And also because the times had changed from as being somebody who is very aware of technology, so it was a combination of their experience and their groundwork matched with something that new that we want to do, to club into some projects that we can implement throughout the country to get trans men on board. So this is how we started, and like just to talk a lot about also from the legal aspects, right? When I went through my name change or the legal changes that were needed, or just started exploring what are the laws from 2014, when the Supreme Court had directed the government that because Supreme Court itself cannot form laws, they will direct the government to form a bill and pass an act, and they had directed the government to provide reservations to trans person in India, ensure that their legal and medical processes are in place, ensure that there are health systems that are in place for them. It took 5 years, 6 years. There were a lot of bills that were proposed, but because of them not being something beneficial for the trans person, and a lot of bias was there in those bills from the government side, a lot of lack of information from them what the trans person community is about. In fact, a lot of like first few years, like from 2016 when the first bill came out, the definition itself was very problematic about trans person. There was no mention about trans men and inclusion in a way that trans men also get a lot of these benefits. So after a lot of revisions from 2016 to now 2019, the bill became a little more proper, but still remained a little problematic. And last year, in 2019, November was when it came. It was passed in the parliament despite a lot of protests on some of the aspects of the bill that was not acceptable to the trans community. We are now at a place where the acts rules are getting formed, and we are like trying to reach out to the government that to be a little more inclusive and care about the individual rights, and not because right now what we see is that the government, although they're like a little more open to listen to some of the facts, they still go ahead with convenience of majority versus convenience of minority, right? They go ahead with the convenience of majority, where they don't have to go through the trouble of like say if keeping as little process as possible, because for trans persons
Shriman,
like for example,
I'm going to come back to you on the transgender bill in India.
Sure.
I'll come back to you on that. But I want to specifically ask you, you said that when you were starting your organization and your work on trans men's rights, that you reached out to trans women's communities, and those communities were more advanced, were more organized. I mean, there would be that perception that all trans issues are the same, that all trans persons fall into the category of trans. But you have clearly shown that actually the struggle for trans men, is very different to the struggle for trans women. And actually the struggle is it seems to be much newer in India, whereas there's a perception that the trans movement in India, spans centuries almost. So why do you think the trans movement for men in India particularly is so new, when the trans movement for women has been there for so long?
Yeah. So, I mean, just my understanding of this is probably, I can't speak for everybody, but I see it a lot being in the structure of how our countries are patriarchal, right? If a female born person is dressing as a male, right, it is never considered as a huge problem in India. They will just say, okay, the person is just dressing as a male. They would be, of course, like looked at as somebody like different, or somebody who does not fit into the system, but not in a very degraded manner, which is probably because like you consider the males to be at a higher societal level in the patriarchy system, and when somebody is going, say, dressing from a female to male, it is seen something as okay, oh nice, you're just being manly, or so it's sometimes seen as, this is what happened with my family also. They never objected to me dressing as a male. So I think, and because of that, I mean, it's a very weird situation, because you are a little not in trouble because of that, but the trouble becomes higher because the problem is not recognized. And for years, right? For years, there is like, in fact, for me also, nobody really sat me down and asked like, what is that you want to do, or what is this, that how can we solve this for you? But if I was suppose a male born who was dressing as a female, I am sure that I would have been kicked out of my family as soon as I started doing that. So in that way, I think that is where there is a huge difference that comes in. And also then, once I have identified as a male, for me to come out of the house, right, and say, okay, for a female born to rebel and say, okay, I'm leaving the house, I'll figure out life on my own, becomes much more difficult, because they live under much more pressure inside their homes. They tend to be put down a little bit more because of the patriarchal system in India. And that is where I see like a huge difference. In fact, even if you see education wise, a lot of the trans men that I meet and I work with, they have gone through their schooling and probably colleges till 10th 12th, or at least the graduation level. Again, the same point, right? If I am a female born and I'm entering a college in a like male dress or a male haircut, it is a little less likely for me to be bullied as much as a trans woman would be. And it is a struggle, but I would just internalize it and go through with it, because then I also want to independently earn and just get my life sorted. So this is the major difference that I see for a trans woman's journey to a trans man's journey, especially in Indian context.
Thank you, Shaman. Bhumi, we've just heard Shaman's reasoning of why the experiences of trans men in India is different to that of trans women. What has it been for you as a trans woman in Sri Lanka? Do you see a similarity to the struggles which have been experienced by trans women and men in both India and Pakistan, or do you think the cultural context, the socio-economic context of Sri Lanka is different, and therefore the trans communities have had a different struggle to that of our neighbors? We can't hear you, Bhumi. Are you on mute? Hello, Bhumi? Still can't hear you. Maybe take your speak. No, we still can't hear you. Are your speakers, is your phone connected to the Bluetooth device? No, we still can't hear you.
Hi, Bhumi. Try connecting to the audio phone. There should be an option in the bottom.
Bhumi, if you move your cursor to the microphone and click on call via device audio, that might work. I think you had done that at the start of the call. Just move your
Yeah, we
cursor
heard you at the beginning.
over the microphone and click on call in via device audio.
Bhumi is using her phone, not her. Bhumi, are you using your phone or your laptop? Right. Laptop, yes? A phone, she's using the phone.
Okay, maybe what we can do is, Aritha, you could maybe take forward the conversation with Aisha and Shaman, and I'm going to work with Bhumi to maybe log off and log back on. Yeah?
Yeah? Okay, great.
Thank you. Bhumi, I'm calling you. Thanks.
Shaman, while we sort out the technical issues on Bhumi's side, another interesting thing you said was that you realized that you were a man, a boy, when you were around 6 or 7 years old. How did you come to realize that, and how was that struggle for self-acceptance?
So
Especially
me,
in a society where, as you were saying, you were not given that option, you were not made aware of that you could be a boy. You were we live in a very, especially in our societies, we have gender stereotypes, our cultures also can be very highly gender segregated. So as someone who was born biologically female, and then you're saying at such a young age, 6, you realize your gender was that of a male. how was the struggle for self-acceptance within, and then and personally with your family as well?
Yeah. So, like, because I've worked with a lot of people, I know that it varies for everybody, right? How and when you realize that you identify as a guy, and even what are those things where when you can say for sure that yes, this is what I identify, and probably like I just don't have the vocabulary for it. But for me personally, although I didn't have a vocabulary, I like I, I didn't struggle to that period where like okay, do I identify as a boy or not? I didn't, because it was very innate and I knew it for sure. It was just that I couldn't convey it to other people why. So the struggle now wasn't a lot with myself internally. It was just that how do I ensure that I am disconnected from how other people are referring to me as, and how I refer to me as, or I treat myself as. And for that reason, I had to like get myself a lot detached in terms of, right, in terms of friends and family and how they're treating me, or how I am going to school. Just for an example, like if I would go to a school wearing a skirt, I would just internalize the fact that hey, this is just uh, clothing, this is just my body. I mean, I don't have to like let it affect my inner self. It's just a piece of clothing. So a lot of detachment from my physical real to what was inside me was required to go through that phase, right? Yeah, so I mean, I know that it varies a lot for a lot of other trans men. Some of them, are able to internalize it much later in their life, and that is for one reason. That is why I would I was very clear in my communication, whether to my family or friends, a lot of times in life. Throughout the childhood and even when I grew up, because I like inside me was very clear about it. I would just say that yes, this is how I want to be, without a why, but I would at least communicate that to everybody whenever it was possible.
Thank you, Shaman. Aisha, one of the things which Shaman, when Shaman was talking about the different histories and struggles for trans men as opposed to trans women, one of the things he mentioned was the patriarchy of our society, and how as Shaman as a biological female, when he was transitioning or accepting his gender identity as a male, it was seen as less controversial and in a way more accepted, as opposed to someone who was biologically female accepting their gender identity as a woman. So for you, Aisha, in a society such as Pakistan, which is, I'm assuming, forgive me if I'm wrong, as conservative as the rest of South Asia and as patriarchal as our societies are, um, what was your struggle for self-acceptance personally, your own personal struggle, but also with your family? Because that's a major issue which many of us, especially in the wider LGBT community, face. Is this acceptance by the family? We may sometimes have progressive laws. We may get laws in wider society sometimes on our side, but family, who we sometimes most depend on, may not be on our side. What was your story?
Um, well, I would totally, second what Shaman Gupta has said, because see, everything bends to patriarchy, and we live in a patriarchal, patriarchy prevails in the subcontinent, especially in Pakistan also. So I have many friends here who are trans men, but they do get accepted in their families, because having a girl, having a daughter who becomes a son, that is something to be proud of in a patriarchal society where the patriarchal mindset prevails. But being a trans woman, it is difficult. Even today, it is difficult for the families to accept their trans women, to accept their transgender daughters. Um, but in some cases, even trans men do not get the acceptance. because society pressurizes men and women both to live in certain way. So even trans men are pressurized by the families to live like a woman. But as compared to the trans men do get some kind of acceptance, because we also see that in some families there are girls who dress up like boys, um, whether they are trans man or not, but the families are okay with it. But you would not see in the families that there is a son and who is wearing makeup and living with their relatives and family members. So this is the dilemma, that we do not accept the femininity, and trans women till date face this problem. And as you have mentioned, that we have made legal developments, we are making policies, but there is a long way to go when it comes to family acceptance and social acceptance. Even I don't live with my family. Um, so many educated and successful trans women in Pakistan, they do not live with their family members. They do not associate with their relatives because of the social pressure, and this thing has to change, has to be changed. But I'm very hopeful that we are moving in the right direction, because like 5 years back or 10 years back, we did not see trans people working in different organizations. But now in Pakistan, we see that we have the law. There are jobs now. Recently, a trans woman has been inducted in police in Pakistan. So these are the social changes that are happening, and this would change the mindset of people, and that is when people and the families would start accepting trans women. Because see, the you know the reason is that in Pakistan, people have already always seen trans women. You know, the Khajasara culture and the Hijra culture, they always had trans women and intersex people in them. Trans men were not part of the Hijra culture and the Khajasara culture. So people are not familiar with what a trans man is in Pakistan. Um, they only accept transgender women. They only consider them to be um, um, someone who is begging on roads and who is dancing on weddings or who is doing prostitution. So these things, add to the stigma of associated with being a trans woman. But now, when people would see that trans women are working on decent positions, they are empowered, they are educated, they can become a productive citizen of the country, then the negative perception would change. Because now I see that I get messages from my cousins, from my family members, and many of them have now started accepting me and supporting me. So I think I'm very hopeful that in coming years we would be seeing more acceptance. But yeah, but still, I think we have a long way to go.
Thank you, Asha. You mentioned that you don't live with your family anymore. Now,
Mm.
forgive me if this is a difficult question for you, but why is it do you not live with your family anymore? Is it because of their inability or their struggle to accept you?
See, because it's been 6 years now. I started my activism 6 years ago, and I was very active for the transgender rights and the whole movement in the country. But my parents, my family was never comfortable with me coming out as a trans woman. They always wanted me to live as a boy. So when I did not accept their conditions, and when I decided that no, this I have to disclose my true identity, I have to live the life uh, the way I want to live, because I never thought that being a transgender person is something to be ashamed of. I always felt very comfortable with my gender. I am really proud of whatever I am. So I wanted to, always disclose my gender. So my family had, this condition that if I have to come out and if I have to disclose my gender identity, I would have to, leave the house. So yeah, so that is what I chose, and this is the case with, I think, all the trans women um, um, in the country, that when they when they become visible, when they come out, they have to leave their families. because I hardly see any trans women living with their family in the country.
Thank you for sharing that. I can't imagine how difficult it must be to have family that doesn't accept who you are. And anyone should be proud to have a daughter like you. I mean, you're a university lecturer, you work for your government, you represent your country in international fora as part of your government's delegation. You've broken so many barriers as a woman, and it's a shame that we still live in a society where our families and our society does not value us, and especially transgender persons, for their contribution and for their worth. And we are so bogged down about what other people will perceive about us, and about other people's opinions, that we're willing to sacrifice our children. Parents are willing to sacrifice their children because of societal views and opinions. So thank you, Aisha, for sharing that. Bhumi, Aisha's story, Shaman's story, uh, their stories of struggles for self-acceptance within themselves and with their family. How has it been for you as a trans woman in Sri Lanka? Would you say that has your experience been different to that of Shaman or Aisha?
I hope you all can hear me right now.
We can. Great.
Okay. Good evening for everyone. I think the struggle in some parts, it's very similar to like other countries, because we always having the inner struggle from the beginning. Like in our education, there's a no mention or no chapter or not any education system for children to understand who really they are. So, I mean, I also had the same struggle like Shaman, because as a one and only child in my family, and I'm coming from a family background which is Hindu and Buddhist mixed, and well not much educated and middle class family. So it's always like we have advised by our parents, like a boy should raised like this, and he should behave like this and that, which is very opposite to me. So I actually I can't say it's a suffering, but yes, it was in a way a suffering, a journey till up to 2010. There was an inner struggle to identify myself, like who I am actually. With that struggle, I used to compromise myself, convince myself, okay, let it go. Whatever happens, I should enjoy and move. I was kind of a very playful, and I identified and I felt as a girl, but I'm very active and I'm very, how can I say, very naughty person. I had kind of a fights with my school friends, and I'm very fightful person. So in my case, I always found out that I'm not falling into that socially accepted woman category, because I have found I'm not a soft person, and I'm very loud speaking person, and I always try to swim to the upwards, and like, so yes, I mean, my life became more challengeable after I entered to my human rights activism life after 2010. I mean, I got opportunity to attend to a workshop which was about gender, sexuality, gender identities and violations, etc., etc. So that was the turning point, the biggest turning point in my life, that the bulb lightened and was, oh, okay, this is the path that I should choose, and this is the way I should go, and this way will leads to you know, to that place which I really want to be. So then the activism life and becoming a media spokesperson for trans community is like kind of a path which I didn't choose. This is something automatically came to my life, and now fortunately or unfortunately I became the spokesperson for trans community as well as for the entire LGBT community in Sri Lanka, which is very challengeable because uh, the thing is like if you are identifying or expressing yourself as a trans woman, the first question will be asked by the society or people: what do you have in between your legs? Have you done your final surgeries? Have you got changed your documents? Are you having a plan to get married, have a family life with a kid and this and that? So like if you have a vagina, or if you got a vagina, and if you really willing to go to that very typical and uh, socially accepted frame as a woman, you will be accepted. But transgenders who feel that she is a woman or he's a man and not exactly going through the entire processes, or like still in between the processes, will not be accepted. Still we are having that issues. Like, I mean, first you was asking about trans men movement in Sri Lanka, if I'm not mistaken, when my audio didn't work. Actually, yes, because they are more vulnerable, because the recent cases that we are having from the trans men community is like the very worst conversional therapies, like their own family, father, brother and brothers, friends, or father's friends and family relatives, uncles, specifically males, trying to rape them, giving the experience of having sex with a penis. They think that it might change them into a ideal woman. So when they get used to it, or like then when they realized of the satisfaction having sex with a penis will change them into a woman. So that kind of a forced therapies and disgusting therapies going on in Sri Lanka undercover. So under the cover, which is very risky. So like that's why I think most of trans men and the trans community is not coming much up, and we are also sometimes facing difficulties when it's going forward as a community, as a joint community, as a trans community. We don't have much trans men representation. So we find that, I mean, recently, as Aritha also aware about this, we are working on the trans protection bill in Sri Lanka. So we are unable to get much inputs from the trans men community, because there are no much contribution or support from the trans men community, because what they all say is like, I want to become a man and going through the surgeries, I want to get married to my woman and have a peaceful and in life. I don't want to get kind of exposure to the society to drag the unnecessary attention to my life. So it's really challengeable. It's always, I mean, in Sri Lanka, I have no idea about other countries, but in Sri Lanka, it's always about what you have in between legs and why you want to go against the social structure, and whatever you have done or whatever you have gone through the surgeries and whatever, you are still a man. So it's always about like myself ringing the bell by saying, here, listen, I'm a woman, I have this and I have gone through this. This is why I always finding kind of a difficulty to always explaining about my journey, because there are some kind of wounds which yet to heal, because that much kind of Aisha will be agree with me. It's really hard, some incidents that we have gone through, to remind again and again and expose it about like, this is exactly what I have gone through. Actually, I love my father. I love my father a lot, who passed away exactly 1 year ago. I really got very few time period to spend with him. I still, sometimes it's kind of gives me kind of a guilty feeling that, oh, I didn't do much for my father. Because both parties wanted to live together and have a good time and be there for each other when they really need. But the social pressure that my mother still gets, it's really high. I'm still have to wear a shirt, tie my breast and tie my hair, and make sure that I won't wear lipsticks or not wearing nose piercings and earrings to go to my parents' place. Because the judgment is always making my mother so pressurable. I mean, the thing is, which we are not focusing on much, that not only us is going through this transition, but also our families. In some points, in some ways, we have kind of linkages. At least, I mean, I have kind of a supportive friends and organizations or counseling systems which I can reach and tell about my mental pressure, what I am going through. But where should my mother go? Do we have kind of a supportive system for my mother to talk about these issues and get cleared it? So I think that we have found out, I mean, this quarantine period, this lockdown period gave me such a good opportunity to rethink about the structures that we have already made, the things that we have to develop. As an example, in 2015, we got managed to achieve the gender recognition certificate through the government. But still, there are some conflictable areas which we have to work more, because in that policy document, in that certificate, specifically mentioned that you don't have to get parents' affidavits or the personal affidavits to approve it. The government officials can take that certificate itself as an affidavit, because if it's a medically and health ministry certified document. But still they are asking for proofs, the medical proofs and the billing proofments to certify the names and parents affidavits and this and that, etc., etc. So I think more work on my way. Unfortunately or fortunately, will be coming more sleepless nights. But yeah, I think that there are some blind areas which we really have to touch it and enlighten it. So journey, I mean, apart from my journey, the movement is becoming more challengeable because the election period is coming up. So these are the particular time period which most of Sri Lankan starting considering about the culture and the religion and most, this motivative things, to destroy the culture against systems and, protect the culture and the protecting the religion. Everything is coming up during the election period. So yes, I think there are more spaces that we have to touch. The movement, trans movement is becoming more stronger, more inclusive, and trying and figuring out the more, innovative spaces to reach the goals.
Thank you, Bhumi. You and Aisha, particularly both of you, spoke on the struggles you've had with your family, and we have a question here from the audience on, what can you do? What can we do, especially to change the perception of parents in order to understand a trans child and accept a trans child as a normal child?
Sorry. I think what we have found out, as I mentioned, that there's a no parent supportive system. I mean, what we are trying to do is we are trying to create a P flag, which is going to be a parent supportive system. That we are planning to have a gathering of all trans women and men, parents, friends, relatives, who are willing to, somehow accept their kids, their nephews, and, their relations who are going through this transition and who are already went through the transition. So we are going to create a space for all parents to get together and discuss about it, to share their experience and feelings. So with that kind of a bond, we are going to create a system, a referral system, a parent who really want to talk about her or his, inner struggle of accepting their kids, can come to us and talk to that parents who are already accepted their kids. So it will be a kind of a helpful thing for them to, make their mind or souls strong to accept their kids, and to say to the society, here, whatever you are saying, that's my kid. So I have to think about my kids' happiness and future. So let me be with my family. So we are trying to move forward and create that parents network, and especially special guideline for parents. It's a handbook, so any parent can go through that book, or counseling. I mean, there will be another supportive counseling system as well. So yeah, very
great. Thank you, Bhumi. Bhumi, you spoke of the gender recognition process in Sri Lanka. So we have gender recognition certificates, and now we're working together. iProbono is working together with your organization in order to draft a new transgender protection bill for Sri Lanka. What would you like to see from this bill? And considering that there's already gender recognition in Sri Lanka, I mean, I have a question from Rabia Bashir. She's a Sri Lankan. She's potentially a doctor in 2 months, and she says her biggest fear and worry is, will she be able to serve her nation as a doctor, being a trans woman? What are her rights? Where does she really stand?
Is that a question for me?
It's for you, yeah.
Yeah.
From a Sri Lankan.
So actually, we have trans doctors at the moment. I mean, there's a eye specialist she's working in Badulla Hospital, I guess. So she is much elder to me, but who studied from the same school. So I think what we are planning to, and what we are hoping to achieve through the protection bill, is the inclusivity and acceptance and equal opportunities, basically. So equal opportunity as a family member, equal opportunity as a student, equal opportunities as a worker, or equal opportunity as a citizen. So what we are specifically saying is, this is something I also personally believe, that we shouldn't labelize things. Trans rights, gay rights, or women's rights, or children rights, everything. I think personally, I believe like we shouldn't labelize it, because the labelizing or categorizing the service providing systems and everything also create a discrimination itself. What we have to think about is more inclusivity, including people, or inclusion, and create a space which is equal for everyone, despite of their gender, sexuality, or gender identity, or disability, or whatever, nationality, or whatever. So I think we have to look forward, and we are looking forward also through the protection bill, is inclusion and the equal treatments and acceptance. So that's what we are trying to achieve. But as I said, the issue with the gender recognition certificate is very biased. It's very gender biased. If you are going through the process, and if you are trying to get done your documents as a male or female, you will be accepted. So then it won't be an issue. If you are trying to go for more educational authority institutions, or to your profession, it won't be a much issue. But I think it's also a legal issue which we are always focusing on, but it's also, I think, lack of advocacy that we have done, or sensitization programs that we have done for the general public. So we can put laws and policies into the system and to the structure, but I think its most important thing is we have to also create awareness to the general public to change the way that they think. So I think, yeah, that's the thing.
Thank you, Bhumi. Shaman, we are just speaking of the legal status in Sri Lanka. And I just want to add to Bhumi as well that, the Attorney General has confirmed a number of times that discrimination against transgender persons and LGBT people in general is unconstitutional. They are afforded the right to equality under the Constitution. And like Bhumi said, that doesn't mean that the real lived experiences of trans persons has changed for the better because of such statements. But Shaman, India has just passed the Transgender Act last year, and I know there are lots of issues with this act. Could you maybe briefly highlight to us, what are the challenges with this act?
Yeah. So one of the primary challenge, I think, like in Sri Lanka, is that for anybody to get their certificate as a trans person, or even change their documents from, like, say, female to male or male to female, they have defined a process where we have to apply to the district magistrate. And what is the process after that is a lot dependent on a person sitting in power deciding that, hey, whether I would give you this certificate or not. Whereas the Supreme Court had already given us the right, or like had directed the government to make it a lot on the self identification, right? So even though the government has kept the self identification part, that you submit a request on the basis of your self identification, there's still a process where, to get a trans person certificate, you need to apply to a district magistrate and then get their approval, which a lot of people are worried about, that because it is dependent on a person's personal will. How would that person treat a trans person who's coming with an application, or whether they'll be asked difficult questions, or what would those things be, that on basis of what it can be rejected? Like, how can you define such a thing? Second is that, like, if you want to change your documents from one gender to another, you have to first get a trans person certificate, and also then, like, show some certificates of surgeries, or medical surgeries. Now it has not been yet properly put in the rules what those surgeries are. And as we all know, that most trans person surgeries are, like, very costly. A lot of people cannot afford that. Then does that become a necessity for anybody to be identified as a male or a female? Which again, the Supreme Court had already directed that it should not be dependent on any surgery, because a lot of people like then would be forced to like take loans or go through that process, no matter how unhealthy it might be for them, if they're not really going to a very good hospital or something. So one part is that, right? How do you like identify as or get recognized as a trans person? How do you change your documents? And then there are a lot of other facts that have not been looked into, which is like, for example, the punishment for harassment or sexual harassment of a trans person is 6 months to 2 years, which is much less than what is there in our constitution for cis women. So why is that discrimination in the constitution, like in the law itself? There are not proper guidelines in terms of getting heritage, getting the children rights, and adoption rights, marriage right. There's not much clarity on that. There's no proper provision for reservations in jobs, or even educational institutes. They have just guided the governments, the state governments, to take care of that, which, unless because this has been happening since years, the Supreme Court has guided the state governments, they don't implement it. The central government, some of the state governments have taken it up, but a lot of it does not come into structure unless that is properly defined in the structure of the national law. So these are, and a lot more. I mean, we have been submitting a lot of these, recommendations to the government. And in fact, they recently released out a notice saying that, giving us 30 days time during this lockdown to actually send back the recommendations to them on the rules of the act. Which is, again, I mean, at this time where everybody start struggling for bread and butter, they expect the trans persons community to get back to them with a proper recommendations of the acts. There was no need to pass it so quickly. But this is what we've been struggling with the government. But like for us, at least we have seen some relief in our judicial system, although it takes a lot of years. Similarly, we saw for section 377 of decriminalizing of homosexuality, that government kept going back and forth, but eventually then the Supreme Court had to take a stand and say, you can't not keep this policy or keep this act alive. And then the Supreme Court took the decision. So in that way, we have like some confidence that once we will go back to the Supreme Court, and say that this is against the NASA judgment that was passed, it might take a few years and it might get revised, but it's just lengthens the struggle that everybody is going through for years, that you keep waiting for such laws to be passed. And then just even simple processes like going to a doctor, or like even a college or joining a job becomes difficult for a trans person, unless all these laws are in place. So yeah, that's the major struggle right now.
I think India has also just released a draft rules for recognition of gender identity. Is your organization looking at engaging with these rules and helping change them to make them more inclusive and more representative of the needs of the community?
Yes, we all, in fact, in most of these national consultancies, we don't represent or go by our NGO name, because we don't want, we go as individuals and trans activists, and collectively submit feedback to the government, so that the voice is one instead of separate voices. So we have been meeting a lot of national consultations we are doing, although online, and submitting and discussing a lot of these rules that we need to submit as a recommendation. So we will be submitting them soon, and hopefully if the government realizes that some of these need to be tweaked, we'll have to wait and see. Otherwise, we'll have to knock at the Supreme Court's door.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Shuman. Good luck with that work. And here at iProbono, we're there to help you should you need any assistance, especially with these rules. Aisha, I have a question from the audience for you. And it's especially, the question is, now that you represent the Pakistani state, both locally and internationally, can you speak on what steps the Pakistani government is considering to take in especially tackling the increasing amount of hate crimes and sexual violence against trans women, and especially in the absence of any prosecutorial legal framework? Now, that's something which I particularly saw in the Pakistani Transgender Act when we were looking at the Sri Lanka law, and I think we had this discussion over the phone as well on the lack of enforcement provisions in the Pakistani law. So what steps are you taking, or is your government taking, in combating this violence and hate crime? You're on mute.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Aisha, you froze. I think we're having a small technical difficulty with Aisha. Until she gets back online, Bhumi, I've got a final question for you, and that's you spoke of the challenges with your family, the challenges of acceptance of trans persons in wider Sri Lankan society. It's not easy. It's a struggle, right? But yet we survive, and you survive. Can you speak to us, and especially members of the transgender community who are watching this now, and actually one of them has sent this question on, can you advise them on survival? How do you individually overcome these challenges and step up?
First, what I all have to say is, if you really want it, so work on it. Because if you really want a life with dignity, with respect, you have to achieve it. You have to work on it. Sitting on in a corner and keeping your head on knees and crying won't work. What I learned, nobody's going to, I mean, yes, we are working for their rights, but they're supporting it. But if you really don't want it, if you're not starting work on it, there will be no progress. So what I always advising for younger generation, who younger than me, I always advise them to be educated. First, give kind of an importance for your education. Be qualified, have strength, and then come out. I mean, it's really hard for you to demand if you don't have any backup or strength from your side as well. I mean, we always talking about our rights, but to achieve rights, we also have responsibilities. So what I always advise for Sri Lankan trans community is have faith, have guts, be strong, be prepared, and work on it. If in that case goes like that, definitely as a sister, as a mother, or as a friend, I'm always there.
Thank you, Bhumi. You're always there for everyone, including me. You're such a always good person to talk to. But there's, I know you said, look, if you want to lead a dignified life, you've got to do it. But a lot of trans people live in a society where they see and they're faced with a lot of transphobic abuse and attacks and ridicule. And this also causes a lot of internalized transphobia, where you almost sort of lock yourself up inside and have this self-hatred, and therefore this worsens the process of acceptance and being able to lead a dignified life. I mean, how can you say for someone who has who's trans but has internalized transphobia and is struggling to accept because of how he or she has been conditioned, what kind of advice can you give them?
I mean, with my personal experiences, people say that I'm a strong person, but I was not. I also had actually a lot of internalized struggles. I mean, inner struggles, which I didn't have. I mean, now we have at least some people to talk. When I come out, I didn't have anyone. But like, if you are closing yourself all the time, you won't get any way. You won't see any path. I mean, talk to someone you are really comfortable with. And I mean, nowadays, like a lot of trans community members reaching out to us and seeking support, and we are referring them for their, for counseling services and a gender clinic and whatever the services that they want to come out and have a free life. We support them. But if you don't seek or if you don't approach, I totally agree with you what you have said. Like, I mean, when you're seeing these kind of violations, discriminations, and threats coming up, people as a sexual minority, people will get scared to come out and talk about themselves or like express themselves. But in one point of your life, there will be a chance. So I always say that use that chance at least to start your path. I mean, there will be always a fresh start. So you can use that fresh start. Even I do. I mean, I have missed some part of my life. So I used this quarantine period to think about myself. And I have taken some steps for that to be more strong or prepare. To be honest, like in Sri Lanka, when we are working for trans protection bill, I have no idea when media campaigns and going on things under this kind of a government, what kind of a threats that I will get as a person. So for that, I have to mentally be prepared and be strong. So I mean, as an example, I started going for dancing classes, which will makes me happy and, you know, be more strong and make my mind peace. So like that kind of things, methods are there. So there are websites from various organizations. I mean, people can reach out to those places, and I'm on media, and I have always after my interviews mentioning the ways which they can come back to us with their issues. I mean, seeking support, we always there with open arms to support everyone. So yes, there are ways, but it's just matter of like opening your eyes and see. It's like when you I mean, if you always with fear, if you're covering your faces and eyes, you won't see anything.
Great. Thank you so much, Bhumi. That was very heartfelt and a great piece of advice. We're going to wrap up this panel now. Unfortunately, Aisha has lost Wi-Fi at her residence, therefore she won't be able to rejoin the seminar. But that's fine. Our time's up. We've actually gone for 20 minutes. We had to extend the time because we were getting a lot of really interesting questions. But thank you so much, Bhumi. Thank you so much, Shaman. Thank you, Aisha. You're not here, but thank you. Really grateful for the fantastic audience participation. We had over 200 people registered. I saw over 100 here at any time in this panel. We've been live streaming on YouTube. It will be up on Facebook as well. We're really grateful that you took your time to share your stories with the wider South Asia region and to also speak on the legal issues which face the community and the wider socio-economic issues. Here at iProbono with our equality law work, we've been doing a lot on LGBT rights within South Asia, especially our work in Sri Lanka, and Bhumi and I have been very closely working on a variety of projects. And we're really excited about this transgender protection bill. And we're really grateful to our colleagues and other activists and communities from India to Pakistan to Bangladesh who've been sharing with us the issues with their legislation, so that when we are drafting our law here, we can learn those lessons and hopefully craft a more perfect, closer to perfect legislation, which will truly afford transgender persons in Sri Lanka the dignity which they're entitled to. So thank you once again, everyone, and we'll continue to keep in touch and keep you all informed with if there are any new webinars, but also with our work. Thank you. Thank you, Shaman. Thanks, Bhumi.
Thank you, Aritha. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Have a good weekend and Eid Mubarak.
Same to you. Same to you.